The day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, folks, today I want to share some thoughts on Canon's first quarter. The CEO of Canon also put out an interview on social media. I saw he had posted an interview that he had with Forbes. And I'm reading this post and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I want to discuss that as I go through Canon's first quarter numbers. I want to say this on the onset. Canon is a good company, but Canon's not a great company. Canon's not the best in the industry. Canon has threats just like every other OEM that's involved with print equipment. At Canon, I would say this. I think it's about time that you share the profitability of the individual business units within the print business. You have production. What's the operating profit in that production space? What's the operating profit in the office MFD space, in the other space? What's the operating profit in the LPs, laser printers, and inkjet printers? What's the operating profit? I think if Canon shared the operating profit of those individual business units, it would share a better story. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that Canon has one big customer. And that customer represents a whole lot of revenue for Canon. And that customer is HP. What if something happens with that relationship? And those of you that believe that relationship is going to remain the same forever are crazy. Because our industry is going through major consolidations, major disruptions. And the mindsets of all these folks, they're thinking of things they never thought possible, I assure you. They're talking amongst each other in ways that no one ever would have imagined they'd be having these conversations, but they're having them, I assure you. Canon's no different than anyone else. So without any further ado, let's jump on the board. I want to share my thoughts with you. First thing I want to do is talk about this chart I saw. And you know, Canon, complete structural reforms in 2025, the year to close out, 5-year plan, and work to solidify foundation for the next 5 years. They're all excited about this. They're talking about their top line revenue, and they're talking about their operating profit. And when you look on this chart before I interfered with it, you can see these gray boxes were going up, right? And then I read the fine print at the bottom. I went ahead and blew it up here. It says 2024 excludes the impact of impairment loss. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what the hell? Actually, I said WTF. I wanted to go ahead and include that because that's reality. Okay? That $1.1 billion impairment charge they had in FY 2024 is a reality. Their operating profit when you factor that in is 6.2%, which basically goes here. That means they went from here down. Okay? And now they got to go back up. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, it's fantastic that Canon could absorb a $1.1 billion impairment charge and still be above the line at 6.2%. I'm not taking that away from them. But it seems like Canon doesn't even want to talk about this impairment charge. It seems like Canon just, everything's fantastic. And 2024 was a fantastic year. And this is what this article's all about. You got the CEO of Canon, you know, the chairman. And folks, he's talking about it made a recent appearance in special promotional feature originally published in Forbes April-May 2025 issue. He discussed Canon's record-breaking 2024 sales and our commitment to technology innovation across industries. He went on to say Canon is not just adapting to change, we're leading it. And I'm saying, what are you leading? I mean, is that just talk? What are you leading? What kind of change are you actually leading, Canon, in the print sector? Maybe that change could be you could be one of the OEMs that really digs details and presents those details about your operating profit and all your different business segments of print. Share with the whole world. There was nothing in this article about the $1.1 billion impairment charge they had in 2024. So I had to go ahead and add that in a comment. You know what I find interesting about these types of posts? There was 1,051 when I copied this. 1,051 impressions on that post. And there was 13 comments. Don't you all find that just ridiculous? Of course, one of those comments is mine. Think about that. That thing got reposted 60 times. I reposted it once. But ladies and gentlemen, we can't make comments. We can't ask questions within the comments. I can't believe that nobody brought up the fact that Canon had a $1.1 billion impairment charge, except for me. The good news is I had 7,000 impressions on that comment. But I challenge our industry's leaders. Don't be afraid to make comments. Don't be afraid to ask questions. What the hell's wrong with our industry? It's crazy. I'm reading this article, and they're talking about all the things they're doing. They're talking about some acquisitions they made in their medical business, how successful the medical business is. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, wasn't the medical business responsible for the $1.1 billion impairment? Is that the same medical business, really? And then I want to ask Canon a question. Is your medical business unit going to be the same thing that Konica's was? So we know that Konica Minolta's medical business was just killing them all the time. Killing them. Finally, they got rid of it. But I just think it's kind of strange when the CEO of Canon is in an interview talking about their medical business and how fantastic it is, but forgets to mention the fact that they had a $1.1 billion impairment charge against that business unit. I also want to suggest this to my industry media and analyst friends. There's your logos up there, some of you all here in the United States. Where's your article about Canon's $1.1 billion impairment charge? I mean, where's it at? I haven't seen it. Now, if I missed it, please put a link to it into the comments of today's episode. Just put a link in there. Hey, Ray, we wrote about that $1.1 billion impairment charge over there at Canon. Look at our article. Please go ahead and do that, because I didn't see it anywhere. I saw ENX. They published Canon's 2024 annual report. Didn't say anything about the impairment charge, though. Was this to distract from the impairment charge? Maybe that video I did, oh, yeah, we got to publish our annual report. Here, ENX Magazine, go ahead and publish that thing. And, I kind of went through that a little bit. 2024 was not that good of a year, even if Canon doesn't want to admit it. You can see the net sales and net income attributed to Canon Inc. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the net income went down quite a bit, right? Just saying. I'm looking at this report that ENX shared in their magazine. Here's the link. Go to the annual report. Check it out. And I'm reading this thing. Let me just ask the question. Why is Canon discussing M&A activity from 10 years ago in this 2024 annual report? I am thinking he should have discussed the cause of the disastrous $1.1 billion impairment charge. Why don't you talk about that? You're talking about you bought, Toshiba's medical business 10 years ago, like 2016 timeframe. Seriously. What about the reasons that you had to take this $1.1 billion impairment charge? Let's look at the numbers for the first quarter. Top line revenue was $7.3 billion. Had an operating profit of $670.3 million, 9.1%. Canon delivers operating profit. But that doesn't mean that Canon doesn't have threats that our industry faces. Let's look a little bit deeper. I wanted to look at their business of printing. Ladies and gentlemen, $4.2 billion in revenue for their first quarter, $507.8 million operating profit, which, by the way, that's a pretty good operating profit, right? They're in there at 12% for the print business. I mean, you think, woo, that's a lot, right? Sure, it's a lot. It represents 75.7% of Canon's total operating profit. For the whole company, it was $670.3 million. The print business, $507.8. And the medical business had a 13% of their revenue comes from the medical business. Their operating profit was 4.9%, $46.5 million. Does Canon really believe that this medical business is going to redefine that company? I don't think it is. And I think Canon really needs to pay attention to this printing business, which represents the core of their business. 58% of their revenues and 75.7% of their operating profit. I want to look at sales by region. Sometimes here in America, we look at Canon and think, oh, they're just killing it. They're the biggest in the whole industry. They're a fantastic company. Well, at the end of the day, America represents 32% of their revenue. It would be nice to know what the profitability is from the different areas of the world. That'd be kind of nice, right? We're all talking about these tariffs. How's that going to affect the profitability in Americas? How's that going to affect the profitability around the world? Is Canon going to just pass those costs on? Are dealers going to get big price increases to make sure that Canon can maintain profitability? It'd be nice to know what those profitabilities are by region. Let's look at the production business. The production business for Canon for the first quarter is $693.9 million. So in the blue, that blue number is the percentage that we did here in America, if that holds through for all of their different business units, that percentage. $222 million the first quarter in production. You know, they definitely do a whole lot more production business than our friends over there at Konica Minolta, right? Or Ricoh. But displacement growth is temporary. You know, Canon and other folks talk about this industrial print space for documents, this high-end production print space for documents. You know, I get it. You know, there's going to be a lot of labels being made. And the technology to print labels with inkjet has changed dramatically. But there's also going to be a lot of competition in that label space. And without business printing, without, you know, this big production stuff, printing a bunch of documents and booklets and all these things, these OEMs are going to find themselves stressed. And over the last few years, they've picked up some business as people left the old presses and moved into the digital landscape. And they left those old presses because the volumes decreased so much that now they could buy these digital platforms that were a whole lot less money. But everybody keeps forgetting the only reason it's going on is because the volumes decreased. And the volumes will continue to decrease. In the prosumer group, $1.7 billion for the first quarter, $544 million of that here in the United States. And folks, you know, in the prosumer group, that's that laser printers, inkjet printers. You know, how much of that business is HP's? How much profit goes to Canon from HP? I think the world should be asking that number because I think it's really important because nothing's for sure anymore. And old relationships can be broken pretty easily in disruptive times. And all these folks are talking to each other and they're talking about things that no one ever thought they would ever talk about. They're thinking about things that were unimaginable just a few short years ago, I assure you. Let's look at the office MFDs, $320 million here in the United States for the first quarter, $1 billion for the first quarter worldwide. Office MFDs. In this group of office, they also have others. Office others, $770.4 million around the world. Total revenue for the first quarter here in the U.S., $246.5 million. As for our IT solutions business, there continues to be strong demand for DX, particularly in Japan. And with the contributions from Proumer, a company which joined the Canon Marketing Japan Group in March of last year, we are planning for annual sales growth of 5.7%. They talk about this acquisition they made. When they talk about this acquisition of Prime Images, it reminds me of Ricoh talking about DocuWare. Because this Prime Images is 1.7% of the office business unit, both MFD and others. It's 1.7% of the revenue. Prime Images is 4% of the revenue in the others group by itself. And folks, $770.4 million in office others, okay? Prime Images is 0.7% of the total print business. If you take their total print business, over $4 billion in revenue, this acquisition they made represents 0.7% of the total business. And I got the number because I looked it up. You know, before Canon bought them, the revenue was $125.7 million. That's $10.5 million monthly. Based on the quarterly numbers, based on 10.5 million times 3, that's where I'm coming up with this. Where are the unit numbers regarding production? Why is Canon not telling us the unit growth rate for production. I just think that's interesting. I mean, they sure as hell tell us over here what it is for the office MFDs, laser printers, and inkjet. It's right over here, right? And by the way, you know, the first quarter for office MFDs, the growth rate year on year is on -5%. Laser printers and inkjet, laser printers, it's up 17%, inkjet, it's up 13%. Why is it up? What's the profitability on that? It's so important to know these things. But what's missing is really interesting to me. When they brag about production and how exciting they are about production, why the hell don't they share their year-over-year growth on the units? I think it's a fair question, Canon. What was the purpose of the $521 million loan? This was a subsequent event right there in the consolidated financial statements. Use of funds, operating funds, borrowing date and amount on April 9th, borrowed $347.3 million. On April 16th, they borrowed $173.7 million. The total together is $521 million. What for? What was the reason? I wanted to look at their consolidated statement a little bit deeper. You know, Canon still has a lot of goodwill on the books. Intangible assets and goodwill still represents 20% of the total assets. That's a lot. They have $8.2 billion worth of goodwill and intangible assets. And folks, their total assets are $41 billion. We're talking about 20%. 20% is way too high. Way too high. And I expect there's probably going to be more impairment charges coming soon. When you look at their asset to equity ratio, it's 59.2%, meaning 40.8% of their total assets are encumbered. When you look at their assets regarding the print business assets are $9 billion. That's 22% of the total assets over there at Canon. Others in corporate represent 59% of the total assets at $24.3 billion. Here's something interesting. Does Canon have the boldness needed to create or lead the industry's reinvention? I don't believe they do. I believe they're way too conservative. And I want to share some thoughts with you now. We all know that Ricoh has a major equity player, Masters Trust Bank of Japan, with 18.19% of Ricoh's equity. Masters Trust Bank of Japan also has a stake in Canon, 6.7%. We all know that Ricoh started a company called ETRA, along with Toshiba Tech. Oki just joined into that around manufacturing, the consolidation of manufacturing. Why didn't Canon start that? If they're leading the change, if there's this bold company, should they have started that? When you read about Canon, when you read their aspirations, they talk about, I'm going to say this wrong, but it's Monozukuri. Monozukuri innovation refers to the ongoing refinement and improvement of manufacturing process and the development of new technologies to create superior products and services. So here's what I'm thinking. If Canon really wants to be bold, they're going to go take over ETRA. Why not? This is what I see. Canon go in there and they gobble up 52% of ETRA. Now they're in control of it. Ricoh moves down to 19.74% of ETRA. Oki has their 5.01%. Toshiba has their 14.25%. It goes to 9%. That leaves Canon in the position to bring in some other folks if they wanted to. Maybe someone like Brother. But folks, it wasn't too long ago that the CEO of Canon talked about it going fabless manufacturing. Thinking about outsourcing the manufacturing of their low-end printers and their low-end cameras. Do you think Canon isn't thinking about maybe we should be part of some consortium around the manufacturing of MFPs? If you're willing to outsource the product you have the market share on, why wouldn't you outsource all of it? We're going to see some changes, folks. I'll talk more about this in other episodes. But Canon, if you really want to be bold, get with Masters Bank and take over control of ETRA. I'm pretty sure you could do it pretty easy. Lots to think about in today's episode, but everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck there, and I'll see you all tomorrow.